I can feel The Winds of Winter coming out soon. Not next month, kind of soon, but soon-ish. Specifically within the next 2 to 3 years. And I know that doesn't sound like soon, but considering it's been 14 years since the last book, I think another couple of years can be appropriately classified as soon. So mark your calendars because this is my official prediction and I'm feeling pretty confident about it. No matter what happens from this point onwards, I'm sticking with this prediction. This is my prophecy. I am now accountable to you, to myself, and to it being immortalized here on YouTube. So we all get to find out in real time whether I have any psychic fortune-telling abilities. And before anyone comments calling me a sweet summer child for believing this, let me explain why I feel confident that Winds will be out soon. It all comes down to George's relatively recent blog post, which I haven't been able to stop thinking about, because I think it subtly shows a shift in his mindset towards finishing Winds. It's not just what he said, but the emotions behind it all. That's where this whole theory starts. Let me walk you through what I believe is George's emotional journey throughout writing this post, because I think it reveals more than people realize. It begins with excitement. He's announcing his involvement in a new animated film adaptation of A Dozen Tough Jobs, a story written by his late friend, Howard Waldrop. You can feel how much he admires Howard's work and how proud he is of the screenplay. He literally says no one could have written it better except for Howard himself. But then the tone changes. It's like he suddenly remembers that this post is going out to everyone, and that includes the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom, where people are, let's say, not exactly thrilled when he announces anything that isn't an update on Winds. So then we see him bracing himself. He's anticipating the backlash before it even arrives. So the tone shifts into preemptive frustration. Instead of ignoring the anticipated backlash, he decides to call it out. He starts listing all the things he's either seen or heard people say or accuse him of. So this whole middle section, I would just call it the unloading. He's evidently had enough of holding in all of this annoyance and has finally decided to let it out because he's upset that his excitement for the film adaptation would be ruined by fans complaining about no Winds update. And that's why he's basically saying, why don't you understand that I care about all my projects? And that includes Westeros and Winds. That moment right there where he says that, it reads like a defensive pushback, but also like a declaration, not just to us, but to himself as well. Like he's reminding himself, I do still care, this world does still matter to me. And then we see the tone shift again. After letting all of that out, he seems to come back to the original tone and point of the post. The energy softens. There's this sort of reconnection and tenderness that creeps back in. Almost like after the emotional release, he's been brought back to the core feeling of why he's writing this post in the first place. It reminds me of that feeling after you have an argument with a loved one. You've said what you was holding in that you really wanted to say, even if it was fueled by anger. And now you're sitting in the aftermath, calming down and returning back to the more sensitive feelings of love that were suppressed underneath while all this frustration erupted. So we see George turn back to the project, back into the loving feelings he has for Howard. We see this by him saying, I loved A Dozen Tough Jobs the first time I read it. I loved Howard too. I wish you could all share my excitement at the prospect of this movie. And then we see the post end with, current mood, determined. And that's the line that's been stuck in my head, because what exactly is he determined about? At first glance, you might assume it's about doing justice to Howard's story. And yeah, that would make sense, because that's what the post is all about, right? But I don't think it's that. Because when you look at how George talks about the adaptation, it doesn't sound like someone who's hoping to get it right. He already has so much confidence in it. He says how no one could have written a better screenplay other than Howard himself, and then he later goes on to say that he hopes they will be able to do Howard justice, but immediately follows up with, how can we not? So he already is radiating that he believes this film will be successful. And that's why I don't think this determined feeling is directed towards the film. I think it's about finishing wins. Let me explain, because this is where I'm going to hit you with some actual evidence, I think. I did some research into George's past blog posts that end with the current mood determined tag. There are only 10 instances I could find within the past 12 years where George has used that specific tag, and every single one of them follows the same emotional pattern. So here's a neat little table I've made, and I've put all the blog post links in the description of this video if you want to check them out too. I might have missed some because any posts that were from before 2017 are on LiveJournal, and you can't really search or filter current mood tags very well on there. Also, the current mood feature on these older entries are still shown, but it often just says null. Not sure what that's about. And then also, since George moved over to WordPress for his blog instead, he writes the current mood tag manually, so it's not actually a tag, so it's not easily searchable on the blog itself. So hunting down these determined entries was basically a manual Google archaeological task in of itself. Anyway, as you can see from the selection I did find, he uses the determined tag after something heavy has hit him emotionally. So we see a lot of political despair, injustice, frustration. And right after each emotional hit, there's a promise, a public vow. We see vote, support, strike, fight. And then we see the declaration, determined. That's the pattern over and over. There is one post that is a little bit different though, the oldest one on this list. The one from 2013 titled Reading Recommendations. At first glance, it doesn't seem to fit the pattern because it's not tied to a serious external event like politics or activism. It's just a post recommending books. But if you look closer, the emotional pattern is still there. The post came from George being swamped with emails from fans asking what to read while waiting for wins. And even though that's not the same kind of heavy emotional trigger as a strike or an election, the fan impatience is still an emotional pressure point for him. And what does he do in response? What's the pledge here? He turns fan frustration into something constructive. He decides to put the spotlight on other authors he thinks deserve more attention and uses his platform to elevate stories that he holds in high regard and in a similar realm to A Song of Ice and Fire. So we can still follow the basic pattern of emotional hit, public vow, determined. And actually, that 2013 post might be the only one on this list that most closely mirrors this recent 2025 one, because the emotional trigger is the same. Fan impatience over waiting for wins. But the difference is in how George reacts, which makes this recent post really stand out. Because for the last 12 years, all those other determined mood posts ended with an action that faced outwards, at politics, the industry, supporting someone else, a reading list for waiting fans. But this time, there's a notable difference in his usage of determined. The frustration isn't aimed outwards to external events or actions. It's directed inwards, at himself, at the pressure to finish wins. It seems to be the first time the emotional spike and the vow are both about the same thing, which in this case is his own unfinished story. Like, if we follow the historical evidence, the driver for the determined mood tag should be the unresolved emotional stressor he shares within the blog post. And what's the unresolved tension in this post? It can't be the film adaptation, because as I went over, he seems pretty confident about that. And confidence follows certainty, but determination follows conflict. And the only conflict in this entire post is about wins. So we can then see how this post follows the past determination emotional pattern, but it's just been hidden within the main topic of the post instead of being the main subject of it. And that shift from a public cause to personal conflict is notable because I think this gives us the strongest textual footing we've had in a while for believing that he's tapped into a fresh surge of motivation to finish the book on his terms, in his voice, before someone else tries to write the ending for him. In the past, he was determined to protect others, actors, workers, voters, society. But now it feels like he's trying to protect his own story, not from Hollywood or the internet, but from himself. From time, from the risk that it might never be told the right way, his way. Because for George, getting the story told right, the way he intends, clearly matters. Just look at how he talks about honouring Howard's work. When he says how he hopes they will do Howard justice, but then immediately follows up with, how can we not? He's showing how he already believes the film will be a true and faithful adaptation. And that is what specifically matters to him. He clearly cares about how stories are adapted and interpreted. We've all seen how vocal he's been about adaptations. Specifically, I'm thinking of that famous House of the Dragon post he made after season 2 aired. And his general primary point of contention seems to always be about how the original source material sometimes gets lost in translation, and the butterfly effect of removing or altering characters and storylines ultimately leads to the adaptation being of lesser quality. It seems to be a big area of critique and disappointment for him, and I'm sure that's coming from personal experience. So then imagine him, again, as he was writing this post. He's reflecting on Howard's legacy, on what it means to honour a friend's story properly. And I don't know if honour is the right word, but something like that, like tribute, legacy, responsibility. How he wishes his stories would be treated with as much care and consideration when he's gone. Then thinking about the current pending status of his own story, about the versions of his work that have already been adapted, and how far they strayed from what he intended. He hasn't had that moment of knowing his story was translated faithfully. Maybe A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will do that, but we'll have to wait and see. But now there's this pressure from fans, from time, from himself, to make sure that at least the book version of his story gets told the right way. So while he's writing this blog post, he's sitting with all these heavy emotions. Grief for his friend, pride in the adaptation, a sting of defensiveness, years of fan pressure, of internal pressure, and through all of it, one thought is probably pressing through. If I want this story to be told right, I have to be the one to finish it. And that's what we're seeing when he types that final line of current mood determined. He's formally setting an intention to do something, not for the project he already feels good about, but for the one that's still haunting him, the one he still has yet to finish. So now that we've covered the historic, emotional evidence, let me share why I believe this determined energy could lead to Winds being finished within the next 2 to 3 years. So here's what we know. In October 2022, George said he was around 3/4 of the way done, and that he thought Winds was going to be bigger than both A Dance with Dragons and A Storm of Swords, which are currently the 2 largest books in the series, both being about 1,500 manuscript pages. So using that as our standard measurement estimate, since that was the last official update we got, we're just going to assume he's still at that 75% done mark. And I think it's a good idea to use this 75% done estimate as a benchmark, because even though that was nearly 3 years ago, during these past 3 years, he could have either done nothing or he's gone back and rewritten pages, changed some things. So I think just going off 75% done just gives us a bit of like a breather window anyway. Now let's say from this point onwards, it takes him another 12 to 18 months to finish writing those last 500 pages, which I think is a generous time frame because he's not starting from scratch, and And I am confident that he's got this fresh boost of determination to push him through. So if we say about a year and a half to finish the book itself, we then have to consider the publishing pipeline of proofreading, editing, marketing, all that stuff. And I think all of that in itself takes 6 to 12 months. So then combining those two estimates, we have the 2 to 3 year total. And that would mean we should see The Winds of Winter in our hands somewhere between early 2027 to 2028. And that's essentially why I feel good about my predicted timeline estimate. And I know the determined energy is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this theory prediction, but I genuinely believe that that's how he feels, and he's directing it towards finishing Winds. I can really feel the Winds of Winter coming. Winter is coming! And just in case anyone's still thinking, oh, you sweet summer child, let me just say, this isn't my first emotional rodeo with George. I've been in this fandom for a while now, so I'm not exactly new to A Song of Ice and Fire. Although, I guess that depends on your definition of new. I actually came into the fandom through the TV show Game of Thrones, like I'm sure a lot of people did. But what really pulled me in wasn't just the show itself. It was actually all of the creators on YouTube that were making videos about lore breakdowns, theories they have, video essays, deep dives, just into all of this stuff that the show skipped over or simplified. And eventually, after watching all of this YouTube content, I finally decided to read the books. And this would have been around the time when the show ended, because by that point, I decided I wanted to explore this vast world that seemed so much more intricate and just more interesting than the show. And I also felt like I wanted to read a better story for what these characters deserved, since the show's ending had a lot of wasted potential. So by the time I got into the books, I already knew what I was getting into of this current waiting period between books, of this limbo state. And there's probably a lot of fans who are in the same position since the last book came out 14 years ago. There's going to be so many fans who joined during this in-between time. So this version of the fandom is literally all we've ever known. But we all willingly chose to be a part of it, despite there being no clear indication of Winds coming out anytime soon, which is just a real testament to show how amazing these books are, to have all of these people willingly waiting for the books to be finished. Like choosing to stay in the fandom just because of how much they love the world. But I also think the long wait is also why every A Song of Ice and Fire fan is just seemingly permanently cycling through the 5 stages of grief, which is why the fandom as a collective, at least on the internet, seems pretty negative all the time. And I get it, I really do. I've also rotated through the grief cycle multiple times, but right now, I've been sitting in the acceptance phase for a while. I've made my peace with the idea we might not get an end to the story, and I feel fine with that. Like, I genuinely feel okay if this story never ends. But this blog post gave me a fresh dose of optimism that Winds, at least, might actually be on its way. As for A Dream of Spring, let's just say the title seems a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's okay with me. As I said, I really don't mind if the series doesn't get finished. I actually kind of dislike endings anyway. I have a habit of not finishing TV shows or books just so that they can stay alive in my mind. Like, if I never read the final book or the final chapters, or watch the final episode, then the story still exists in all possibility. It's hard to explain, but if you also feel like this, let me know. Because for me, if I finish something I was once so immersed in, I kind of feel like there's a void now in me. I don't know how to describe it, but if you feel similarly, let me know how you describe it. But because of that, in a weird way, my relationship with this world, with these books, books is kind of a perfect match. I'm like the antidote fan to what George was describing. Instead of criticizing him for not finishing, I'm almost grateful. I really wonder what his take would be on this perspective as a fan. I wonder if I would get my own chunk of roasting on a post. But seriously though, there's something kind of freeing about stories never ending. It keeps the world alive, the mysteries unsolved, and the theory machine churning. The ending hasn't been locked in yet, so we all get to enjoy the unlimited wonder and curiosity. And for me, that feels like a gift in of itself, like the silver lining of the unfinishedness. And in a way, this extended wait is a part of what I think makes the fandom so great. It's literally what pulled me into the fandom. All of these amazing YouTube creators that have consistently for years been making all of these videos about this amazing world and just keeping it alive for us all to collectively explore and share together. And I don't know, I just think that's pretty neat. But even with all of that said, even with my avoidance of endings, I still believe that The Winds of Winter is coming and that it will be out within the next couple of years, because that's where George's determined energy is going. This story still belongs to him, and now I think he's finally ready to tell it. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to share about my take after reading George's blog post. But leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Did anything I shared in this video change your perspective on Winds actually coming soon? Are you also a hopeful fan? If so, let me know so we can form a little pocket of optimism in what is probably the least hopeful fandom on the internet. And if you're not feeling hopeful, let me know what stage of the grief cycle you're currently in. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like. Subscribe if you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire content from me. I'm currently rereading all the books to refresh my memory as I work on more videos, which I'm really excited about. So subscribe if you want to see more from me in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!
Why did you do that?
I always rip out the last page of a book. Then it doesn't have to end. I hate endings.